You're worried
Thanks,
the Melbourne
Annalise.
Ring of Steel isn't being policed properly.
Well, it's been in place now for 2.5 weeks, and every day the Premier of Victoria stands up and gives us example after example as to how people are simply walking through this lockdown or checkpoint. We've got so many examples here in Shepparton and around northern Victoria where people come up from Melbourne for shopping and the most ridiculous excuses as to why they want to get out of Melbourne. It's very selfish, but quite clearly it's very simple and it's very clear that the borders and the checkpoints around Melbourne are simply not containing people to that area.
But they have, as you heard there before, police monitoring this Ring of Steel as well as the Australian Defence Force. What more could be done to stop people leaving this area, or is it a hopeless task?
Well, for the last 2.5, 3 weeks, we've had 2 checkpoints. We've got this really soft checkpoint on the outskirts of Melbourne that people effectively just walk through. And when you get to the Victoria-New South Wales border, we actually have a serious lockdown where you cannot pass without a permit. So that's holding up all types of essential workers, but it's still in place. So today we hear there's 70 to 80 workers from the Wangaratta Health Service that are unable to access their place of employment at Wangaratta Hospital, simply because New South Wales, at the border there, New South Wales, won't let them through. So what we've got is at the border, we've got a genuine lockdown. Around Melbourne, day after day after day, people are just waltzing through and taking this disease into the regions.
Doesn't that example, though, you've raised with medical staff not being able to get to Wangaratta highlight one of the key concerns in over-policing a border like this, that you can actually have some pretty critical workers blocked from getting where they need to go?
Well, I think there's an opportunity to work through all of the consequences. There's no problems. There's no doubt about that. Every time you do this, you're going to run into a whole raft of instances that will need attention. There's always going to be those cases. But what I'm saying very, very clearly, and I've been calling for this for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and that is, if you're serious about containing the infection to Melbourne and Mitchell Shire at the northern end is in my electorate, if you're serious about containing that, then get serious. There's 1.5 million people in Victoria outside of Melbourne, and we owe that 1.5 million people, we owe them that we do everything we possibly can. And right at the moment, you simply can't be honest if you're saying we're doing everything we can to keep those 1.5 million people safe. And every time that there's another outbreak in the regions, it's always traced back to somebody who has flouted these rules and flouted these directives from the Premier and simply taken the disease into the regions. What's happening in the aged care facilities in Melbourne at the moment is absolutely terrifying for our aged care communities in the regions. And as I say, we've got 1.5 million regional Victorians who just at the moment, we haven't got this thing and we're desperate to make sure we don't get it.
Have you approached Daniel Andrews or the Victorian government about your concerns?
I called the office yesterday. They obviously very, very busy. I got a message that they'll get back to me today. So I'm sure the other aspect of this, Annalise, is that if we were to put a genuine lockdown clamp, a genuine and hard lockdown clamp around Melbourne, there would be no need for these border communities to be tearing each other's eyes out, which is going on at the moment. So at the moment, we're living in this no man's land. We're faced with these incredibly tough restrictions on the border, where we're keeping people that live in a clean community away from people that live in another clean community. And we've got all of these ridiculous restrictions between these all these clean communities right along. So people are unable to go to work, people are unable to see their loved ones, people are unable to get to school and education work. It's so on the borders, it's very, very difficult and very, very tough. And people are doing their best to accept what has to happen. But if we were able to seriously contain the infection rates around Melbourne and get serious with that, we would be able to, in a much greater sense, be able to open up regional Victoria.
And just finally, the government's announced it won't appeal this landmark federal court decision that's allowed North Australian cattlemen to be paid hundreds of millions of dollars in compensation. That's after the live exports were banned in 2011 by the Gillard government. Do you support that move? Are you glad to see that come through?
Oh, it's a great win for the National Party. It's a great win for Michael McCormack. I mean, we have fought that as a government, we should not appeal this decision. It was the wrong decision. It was incredibly crippling for that industry. They took it to the High Court. They got a decision. It was in their favour. They need to be compensated for their losses and their damages and their hurt. It's a great decision for us as a National Party looking after our agricultural sector, that we as a government are no longer going to appeal this decision.
Did the Liberal Party ask for anything in return for agreeing to do this?
I'm not across the inner workings. All I know is that Michael McCormack, David Littleproud fought very hard for us to adopt this decision and adopt this position. There was genuine argument as to why we should take another legal action, not to do with the live cattlemen and not to do with the live export industry, but simply to do with the horrendous decisions that were handed down by the court at that time. However, we believe this is a very strong message for our people in agriculture.